the meeting in due course on the council's website. I'm sure that's not the right words that I'm meant to read, but I assume the committee clerk is content with that. We know all the system now, as we're used to operating these virtual meetings. Can I remind members to put themselves on mute when they're not contributing? Ian, just leave yourself off mute, because I know that you've had difficulties in the past with your technology, but just be aware if you do leave yourself unmuted that we can hear you if you decide to swear under your breath at anything. Right. Do we have any apologies for absence?
I don't, Chair, no.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, sorry, I've just received a text message from Blair Allen saying that he is trying to connect, but he's having trouble coming in.
Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest, members? Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Non-financial declaration of interest in item 4 as the Highland Council nominee to the Isle of Rum Community Trust, and also separately as Secretary of Malach Heritage Centre. Non-financial interest for items 8 and 9 as the Council nominee to Lochaber Housing Association and its subsidiary Lochaber Care and Repair. But having consulted the Councillor's Code of Conduct, I think in no way that precludes me from entering into debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Any other declarations of interest? I have a declaration of interest for item 4, the visitor management report as a professional tourist guide. It's a non-financial interest, and I've applied the test as a result and will remain and contribute to that item on the agenda. There being no other declarations of interest, we shall proceed to item 3, the first item of substantive business, which is the performance report from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and we're joined by Mike Collier this morning. Good morning, Mike. Good to see you. If you could just briefly run through any items that you want to bring to our attention on the report that's been previously circulated.
Hello, Chair. Thank you. Good morning to you all. I've just got a small precis here. I'll run through this. With regards to 6 key performance indicators, take cognizance of Q1, which has been influenced by the pandemic lockdown period. Overall, have investigated some upward spikes. No areas are currently causing any concerns from 1920. An increase in February 20 of special service RTCs appears to be located north of Fort William, and we will monitor this with our colleagues in Police Scotland to identify any increasing trends and implement an awareness campaign if required. Due to limitations imposed by the Scottish Government during Q1, traffic was very limited and members of the public were spending more time in their homes. Expectations of an increase in fire-related domestic matters, but particularly against vulnerable members, but appears not to come to fruition. Spike in May has been identified, and SFRS, along with our partners, have worked to engage with a vulnerable member of a community to reduce risk, which has provided a positive outcome. Continue to fully engage with community members through proactive safety message, and have now resumed physical attendance to support these individuals. By engaging both locally and nationally through online forums and the widespread use of social media, we have also seen a downturn in muirburn and other wildfire-related incidents, which was extremely positive, and reduced risk to SFRS personnel at the height of the pandemic. Continue to work with landowners and raise awareness of the changing climate and environmental concerns. False alarm attendances within expectations nationally, providing no increasing trends, and work with the main instigators of activations locally to reduce numbers where possible. Finally, our station availability figures continue to be affected by our challenges for recruiting within communities due to increased travel distances for primary employment, etc. Several stations on the peninsula have lower than desired availability, and we will work proactively with local teams to identify opportunities to improve. For the island of Muck, we are seeking opportunities with prevention and protection team to deliver or attend a locally based initiative for fire safety as the station capability is dramatically reduced. During Q1, we have seen a substantial increase in RDS personnel availability as our service maintained its continuity while other employers moved into closed periods during lockdown. So that's an overview. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions or discussion points.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Mute, Andrew.
Oh. Sorry, my apologies. Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Just one particular question, which is on page 6 with reference to all deliberate fires. I noticed that in April of this year, we had quite a spike with 4, which compares unfavorably with April in previous years. I very much welcomed what you said about decreasing number of newer burn incidents, because I think that is really valuable at this time of year. I just wondered if you could give us any further information on that figure for April. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so in response, the ones that we're looking at are, so that's in April of this year, that's Q1. So they were 3 deliberate that I'm aware of in the Cool Malik area of Grass and 1 in the Lochaber area. We also have 4 accident, so so 1, so they're all grass related fires. Possibly part of what we're discussing there, the response to saying let's reduce where we can. Some of these unfortunately have slipped through in regards to that and had to be dealt with, but nothing on the scale that we've seen on the sort of Moray coast in that area. Our landowners over here have been very proactive and positive, so it's unfortunate we did have those 4, but we'll continue to monitor as we would normally do. I hope that's okay.
Don't see any other questions from colleagues at the moment. I have a couple, if that's okay, Mike. So it was just following up your last point on your report, which was about station availability. First of all, a thank you for the efforts that have been put in over the last 12 months in recruiting additional staff to Kinlochleven. And I know that we've seen an increase in staffing in the village, which is very much appreciated. I know the amount of effort that was put in by you and your colleagues to make sure that happened. You noted that the availability figures for the first 3 months of the year, or the 3 months to June, were maybe reflected by the fact that your service was continuing. Many other employers were in lockdown and maybe staff in furlough, so staff were close to homes, close to their home station, which would have reflected the availability. Are you then anticipating a substantial decrease in those figures in the next quarter, or maybe the quarter that we're coming into now, so would be reported next year? And I have a question about wildfires. Different from Councillor Rickson's and the Muirburn impact, and really it flows into our next item, which is on visitor management. So all the conversations that I've been having with partners over the last few weeks, and I'm sure it's shared by other councillors as well, is an alarming increase in the number of camping fires around the area. And some of these are quite a distance from the road. So, for example, I'm told that every weekend, every Monday, rangers from the John Muir Trust are clearing up the leftovers of wild camping fires at the Still Meadows in Glen Nevis, which is a fair walk from the end of the road there. There is concern that we could, in the future, see this continue and see accidental fires as a result. What sort of messaging can your service assist with to encourage responsible camping and also encourage responsible camping fires, or dissuade people from having them in the first place?
Okay, Chair, thank you very much for that. I'll take the first one, being availability. You're absolutely right. During the period of furlough and no employment, a number of our colleagues were obviously available and keen to make their availability at that point. What we've found as there's been a return, and that was nationally, it wasn't just locally, nationally that happened. What we found is as there's been a return to employment, we've probably resumed more normal levels. We don't anticipate it going much lower than that, but we've got certainly an eye on the COVID situation as well, because that will impact as well if we have COVID outbreaks locally and where it affects some of our personnel. It's a difficult one to answer as how we project for the future. We will be discussing this next year, but if we go into another lockdown for short periods, etc., we may find there'll be increases and then it'll drop away again. From the perspective that we'll probably see peaks and troughs over the next little while, and then it will steady out as we start to have what we would have as the most normal business as usual as we can going forward in the latter part of 2021. Hope that covers that for you. And with regards to the wildfires, we are very much aware of the issue around the camping. The wild camping has proven, Glen Nevis has got an issue, Applecross in particular was really bad, Dornoch, we had some issues over there as well, one of my colleagues. So what we're proactively doing is we're having our teams go out and sort of visiting sites from the stations. So they'll go out and they'll do a bit of community engagement, a bit of engagement discussing it, which obviously works at that moment in time. Our prevention and prevention team are also working on the principles of wildfire impact, camping guides, caravanning, barbecuing, etc. So we would get that message out nationally. And locally, we'll use social media. We'll continue to put posters in maybe some of the tourist businesses, etc. around us. Certainly the weather around at the moment is probably helping us because we'll get a reduced number, but you're absolutely spot on. This is a long-term thing we're going to have. And I think the more that we continue to broadcast that message from a national and local perspective, we'll start to have an impact, because this isn't just happening in Scotland, this is happening right across the UK. So therefore, locally, individuals in their own environments are getting told by different fire services as well, the same problems. So we'll continue to work on that. There are good camp guides. We will put links into Twitter and Facebook that advises on those, how to dispose of waste. Actually, that's, believe it or not, that's been one of our biggest issues, is worrying about attending these incidents and human waste, food waste, etc. being there. And we have to deal with that as well. So there's a hazardous issue around that. So yes, it has presented its challenges. Our crews, though, because they're local communities, are very aware and they've got a very positive and proactive attitude to it. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mike. So Councillor Thompson would like to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to follow up with you on that, the wild camping and fires point. It has concerned me for a while that compared to Scandinavia and North America, we don't have the same strong message on lighting campfires. So in Norway and Sweden, they actually have effectively a campfire ban from April to September, and they do the same in parts of North America. But the Scottish Outdoor Access Code simply says don't have a fire when it's dry. Do you think we should have a much stronger message and actually effectively put in place a ban between, say, April and September? Thank you, Chair.
Hi, Councillor. For me to say, what do I think we should have a ban? It'd be a bit remiss of me to actually say that. I think that's got to be something that comes from Scottish Government, and the ideology being that the more environmental impact we have, the more risk and hazards to members of our communities through these things. It will probably build up an evidence base similar to what we have in Loch Lomond area, where, for example, you're not allowed to have campfires drinking in certain times of the year down the Loch Lomond, the 83, sorry. And that certainly has had an impact down there in reduction, along with ranger patrols. So I think it'll come to a point where we're probably working in conjunction with some of the landowners, some of the Scottish Government, some Forestry Commission, etc. And there'll be a drive towards that as this continues. We really haven't had as much of an issue from campfires causing large fires as other methodologies that have caused the problems through muir burn or, for example, vehicles parking with hot exhausts in dry areas and things like that. So that's something that's probably a longer term vision, to be honest, Councillor.
So can I just follow up on that, Mike? From that, I think what you're saying is if councillors and local communities wish to pursue the idea of a local ban, a local bylaw on the consumption of alcohol in some of these places, which is the case in Glen Etive and Glencoe, we're in quite forward discussions on exactly that. From a fire service point of view, you would support such an introduction of a bylaw if you were asked for your opinion?
From a personal perspective, but I would have to have that discussion with some of our senior managers within the organisation as to whether we would support it. We would certainly support the idea of reduction in social disorder to support our Police Scotland colleagues, and obviously fire and then sort of rural environments which can have devastating impacts. So we'd certainly support that. But I think that would have to be something that I would have to go and discuss with some of our senior managers within the organisation nationally. If you were putting a local bylaw in and you wanted us to come on board that, yes, it's something that we would discuss. But generally speaking, I think we would be supportive of the idea of it.
So it's not an in principle absolute no. It's we would have to consider it.
It's not a no in the slightest, and it's a consideration to make sure that I'm not doing anything which is out with national guidance. I would have to adhere to national direction and then sit down and say we have had a discussion in the Lochaber area, and then our prevention and protection team would say, yep, we either go with that or this is the direction we're going nationally, and I would feed that back to you, Chair, and let you know.
Okay, that's much appreciated. And what I will do, Mike, is I will follow that up with you after the meeting and put in a formal request for you, and I'll outline the area and the circumstances so that you can take that up with colleagues within the service. Because if we are able to have the support of other agencies when we're pursuing such things, it would be appreciated. But I appreciate that I put you on the spot this morning in asking that question. So thank you for your honesty and straightforward approach. Thank you.
Okay.
Colleagues,
Thank you
any other questions for Mike before we allow him to go? No. I think that's it. Thank you very much, Mike. Your time's very much appreciated. And as always, please thank your officers for all the work they do in keeping the Lochaber community safe. It's very much appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Before we proceed to the next item, can I just check with Dot that we are joined with our police partners? Are they with us now?
I'm seeing, Chairman, that I think we've got Inspector Isla Campbell with us. I'm not sure if Isla has any other colleagues and whether or not she wants to delay to allow them to join. Take visitor management now.
Yeah, just me just now, Dot. The Chief Superintendent, his slot he was free from 11. I could possibly get Chief Inspector Valentine on the line just now, but neither of them are particularly precious about being involved in the visitor management discussion, unless you guys would particularly want to hold off for them to be here for that.
Well, it would be nice if they're here, and of course we're keen that they're able to introduce themselves. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to jump on the agenda because I've seen, I think Sandra McLennan is here. I can see her up on the screen. Sandra, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Do you mind if we, as we've got 10 minutes until 11 o'clock, we could jump to your housing performance report, which is item 9, and then that will allow you to get away?
Okay, thank you. Members, the housing performance report for Q1, obviously an impact on performance, members, as a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown period. In terms of repairs, non-emergency repairs were impacted due to a backlog of works orders. We're actively addressing that issue, members. In terms of relets, members, as per my report, there were 6 allocations in the quarter. Allocations were suspended during the lockdown period. We started allocating properties again as soon as it was possible, and all 6 properties are now allocated. Dealing with voids safely was an issue for the team in Lochaber and across Highland. As a result, there were delays in voids, emptying properties were an issue, and also we held properties for 72 hours prior to inspection. The team were very proactive during lockdown, increasing our local stock of temporary emergency accommodation. That was part of our local response. And as per my report, members, we were helped by colleagues in Lochaber Housing Association and a private landlord locally to help deliver that. Rent arrears, increase in rent arrears, members, additional 73 new cases, the universal credit in the quarter. The number of cases and the levels of rent arrears have increased. The team are continuing to contact tenants to offer advice and assistance to address their rent arrears, and referring to agencies for advice. Really important that tenants pay rent if they're able to. If they're unable to, that they contact the local team for help. Obviously, the position with rent arrears does bring additional workload for the team. Appendix 1, members, there's 1 red indicator against tenancy offers refused. This was a refusal of an upper floor flat. I'm happy to take any questions, members.
Thank you, Sandra. I'll start off with a question. It's about housing maintenance and repairs. How safe are our staff when they are undertaking repairs in a tenant's house? And what happens if they are concerned that a tenant isn't abiding by things like social distancing, or is there a requirement that they wear a mask when they have our staff in their home? Those sorts of things. How are we protecting our housing repair staff who are possibly going into situations where they are exposed or potentially exposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is a full and detailed risk assessment for all staff that are visiting, whether that be repairs or any other circumstance. There is full PPE as part of that process, and all staff do wear PPE if they are entering a property. If there is concerns by staff, then they will retreat and leave the property and then take that back to their line manager. There is Angus is here as well, I think, for committee. So I don't know if Angus wants to add anything to that.
If you wish to, Angus, please feel free to come in.
Yes, can you hear me now yet?
Yep, fine.
Usual problem, I'm muting a mic that everybody has. Yeah, so just to add to what Sandra says, yeah, there's full risk assessment. Before any of the repairs team go to the property, the appropriate questions are asked by the service centre about any COVID symptoms or anything like that, and all the repairs team are instructed to ask them questions again when they're at the property, and if there's any level of doubt, then like Sandra says, we don't go in.
Thank you, that's most useful. I'm going to turn to Councillor Thompson now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The topic I wanted to ask about was rent arrears, Sandra, and a couple of points about that. At what point do rent arrears start to become a concern in terms of revenue spend for the maintenance budget? And the second point is, what's your feeling on the extent to which the rent arrears are reflecting economic circumstances, and to what extent is there or to what extent is it a sense that because the council can't enforce any arrears, are some treating it like a rent holiday? What's your feeling between those two factors that's driving a rent arrears? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it's definitely a point of concern that the levels of rent arrears that we're seeing at the moment, and despite continuous contact or trying to contact tenants to get them to talk to us about increasing rent arrears, there is undoubtedly some tenants that are reluctant to speak to us, so that's causing concern. In terms of the economic impact, depending on what happens with furlough, we are anticipating that there could be a further increase in rent arrears. On a positive note, we have signed up and we do get daily payments now from DWP for universal credit. So we should be getting more organised payment schedules from DWP on a regular basis. So we're hoping that that will have a positive impact. But it certainly is a concern in terms of enforcement action. Members might be aware there's an extension to the notice period. So we're unable to take action and issue notices at the moment. That's something we're reviewing, whether we go ahead and start looking at formal action again. There is a suspension on eviction action, but eviction action for us is always a last resort. So it's something that we would want to avoid. We would want to sustain tenancies and try and help tenants pay their rent or come to an arrangement to pay their rent or claim benefits if that was appropriate. So taking into account all these factors, it's really vital that tenants speak to the local area team to get advice and assistance, because we can assist.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. That answers your question. Councillor Thompson? Yeah. Councillor Rickson.
Thank you, Chair. Sandra, in a way, you've partially answered my question by answering Councillor Thompson's question. I suppose this is an impossible situation for us to, or you to anticipate, but I'm just aware too of the variable nature of the unemployment, which is going to affect the area with the economic downturn. It's not just a matter of furlough, it's also the matter a fact that a great many people are dependent on seasonal work in the summertime in the tourist industry, and that's simply been missing this year. And they've either had no work or much less work than they normally have, and that will impact on them in the future, particularly this coming winter and by the end of the winter. Any thoughts, and I know this is an impossible question, any thoughts about how we can best address this going forward? I'm encouraged to hear what you say about the DWP and online and payments, more rapidly. It's just that I have a sense of a sort of impending crisis on this one, that as seasonal work has been in such short supply this year, that we will hit real difficulties between about November and February. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Yes, we have experienced through lockdown some potential increase in job losses through the tourist industry, and we did deal with that in partnership with Skills Development Scotland and PACE. So we have that available to use. We our own housing options team as well. They were very busy and people were contacting them on a regular basis about advice and assistance about their job and also potential homelessness. So between both those teams, it's difficult to say what will happen, but certainly we have a mechanism in place to try and address that issue should it become a problem.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, colleagues? No, that being the case, we'll let Sandra and Angus move on. And thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Right, we'll move back to the main agenda again, and the paper on visitor management, which has been kindly written to us by Richard Porteous. If you don't mind, Richard, I'm not going to invite you to speak to the paper because all councillors are very attuned to the issues raised in this, but we have invited some police representatives along this morning. I'm just checking whether Inspector Isla Campbell is back with us now.
Yep, here I am.
And are you joined by any of your colleagues yet, Isla, or are they going to come in later?
They'll come in separately on their own applications. And I may be joined here in the room with Ross McCartney, one of the sergeants, He's just been sidetracked slightly. The reason for that is he'll be taking a close interest in the Glenetiv work as we go forward. So if he pops in, you might not be able to see him, he'll be present.
Okay.
I think that's the Chief Inspector, Jen Valentine, just looking to come in now, just now.
Yeah, we'll just let them in. So we're expecting to be joined by Chief Inspector Valentine and Chief Superintendent Trickett. Yep.
Yep, he's just finishing up in a meeting that it might take him a few minutes to join us, but it looks like he will be managing to join us.
Okay, thank you. Well, before I ask my colleagues to make any observations on this paper, this is really a follow-up to the conversations that we've all been having over the summer, and a lot of work has been undertaken by not just council officers, but by the police service and lots of other partners with interests in a number of, let's put it, hotspots around the area. I think the important thing to note is that much of this isn't new, that we had many of these underlying problems in certain areas for a number of years now, but we've seen them come to an acute level following the easing of restrictions after lockdown, and the encouragement for many people to staycation. So we've seen an influx of visitors that maybe have never been here or don't appreciate the pressure that they're bringing to the area, that we don't actually have the infrastructure that they're used to elsewhere. And that's caused obviously frustration for many of our communities, and a high desire to address many of these issues. I think the important thing, which I've been saying in the conversations that I've had involving Glenetiv and Glencoe, and more recently Glen Nevis, that there's some short-term things that we can do, but this is much more about a longer-term strategy, as I don't suspect the issue will go away once the virus has been dealt with, that we're likely to see many of these problems continuing into the future. So Richard's paper, I think, is useful in setting out what is happening in different areas, and we're supporting a local area response, realizing that the issues in Tri and Mora area are very different from those in Glen Nevis, and again, very different in Glenetiv and Glencoe, and they need very localized solutions as a result. So I wonder if any of my colleagues wish to highlight, as we do have colleagues police with us today, any particular issues that they want them to be aware of, or to discuss some of the wider issues about how they are able, within the resources that they have, to police some of these issues. Councillor McLean.
Hi, so thanks very much for the paper. It's very informative and covers the vast majority of the issues that the communities are seeing. One thing that's really quite urgent, I think, is the vehicle movements alongside the trunk road, particularly through the A82, well, both vehicle and pedestrians. I don't know if there's an awareness campaign or anything that can be done, but it seems that people are coming from possibly from townscape environments and not realising that they're on a trunk road, reversing onto the trunk road, walking alongside the trunk road in confined, quite dangerous areas, particularly through the gorge section, the meeting of the Three Waters in Glencoe, and there's a habit of the visiting tour buses to drop people off directly onto the 82 at that point. So it's probably just a matter of time before we see another fatality there. There's already been some, and I don't know if there's anything that, obviously the police are limited in some of the actions that they can take, and the manpower to police that. I mean, over the weekend there, it was obviously a really busy weekend. It would be really difficult to get any sort of level of control over it. I wonder how the council can help the police. Obviously, through Glencoe, there's private landowners and the National Trust. So consultation with them possibly, and obviously the trunk road operator. I wonder what the police's thoughts are on it.
Okay, before I let Isla come back in, just for the benefit of colleagues, as it happens, National Trust for Scotland have been leading with quite a large amount of work to try and address some of those issues that Councillor McLean has commented. I know that Emily Bryce, who is the manager for Glencoe and Glenfinnan, plans to circulate that information after today's meeting to all councillors in Lochaber. It doesn't initially address Councillor McLean's immediate issue because it's a longer term strategy to try and get people out of their cars and manage car parking along the Glen there. But at least they are taking the lead as the major landowner through the Glen. But Isla, what can your officers do to assist that situation? And what are they doing? Because I've seen them at some of those viewpoints on a number of occasions.
Yeah, we regularly try and cover the main trunk roads at the peak periods and the peak locations that everybody wants to be at the same time. And generally that is just offering advice and assistance to motorists. We go back to infrastructure, that there's not enough room for everybody to stop if they'll take their car there. And that, you know, while we're in Glencoe, we're not somewhere else in the beak. So it's an awareness raising thing for us as well, although it's accessing these people who are, like you put so eloquently earlier on, they are new to visiting the Highlands compared to previous year's visitors, and actually getting the message to them when they're in transit is quite difficult because they're not necessarily following any of the social media lines from the police or the council or National Trust. So I believe there's an awareness raising theme to the Highland wide work that's going on across the different partners in relation to that, but you'll possibly be better cited on that than myself. We'll continue to keep on doing that engagement, but you know, as soon as we speak to one person, we're missing another 5, unfortunately.
Just to follow up on another point that Councillor McLean made, Inspector, about coach companies dropping their passengers there and unable to get off the road. I would hope that any coach company that at least has a professional guide on board would refuse to stop there, as I have done in previous summers. If we're unable to get off the road, we continue either southwards or onto Fort William, and we guess we'll just have to accept that. Is that something that we can do, work with you within the police service to actually contact, because we know the companies that use that as part of their itinerary? Is it something that we can work together in contacting those companies, reminding them that they need to be safely off the road before allowing passengers to come off their vehicles, and if they're unable to do so, that they should not be stopping at those particular viewpoints?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd probably need to check the various pieces of legislation that are in place, as well as the highway code and things like that. And if we have got access to a list, possibly through Visit Scotland, we can definitely get a form of words together and get that out to them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I start off by thanking Isla for all her help and really positive working this summer. We had quite a few conversations to do with Mora, Try, etc. And I think the police did a really, really good job within the resources available. And I want to thank Isla for being so proactive about it. I think it was really, really positive. We started off the summer getting a very strong message from the communities out there. And I think there was an expectation that the council and the police could just resolve things overnight. And I think it took quite a bit of education to get there. And with the support of the police, we've started to get there, and the response from the community now is, I think, better informed, and they are focusing more on, you know, the infrastructure and actual, you know, achievable steps. So, you know, Isla, thank you so much for your help over the summer. It's been really appreciated. The question I had was, I think I think and I hope within the council, we senior officers are starting to realise that actually we are not seasonal enough in our approach, and that the council's budget needs to be directed in a more seasonal manner. There's probably been some, I think, decisions made in the past about, for example, public toilets weren't correct, and will probably need to be revisited. And I hope that is done. I wondered if the same discussions, the same kind of conclusion would be reached within the police force. I don't know which of you is in the best place to answer that question, but certainly that discussion I think has happened within Highland Council. I hope the realisation is that we will be more seasonal in our approach in the future in terms of how we deploy our resources. And I wonder if the same could be said for Police Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
I'll defer to the Chief Super in case he wants to come in on that, otherwise I'll answer it.
Probably worth me, I've jumped into your committee meeting here, councillors, and probably worth doing a very quick introduction before answering any questions. So thank you for the opportunity. I've got a half-hour slot in my diary, so keen to listen for that period of time. My name is Conrad Trickett. I started as the divisional commander at the beginning of August. I'm absolutely delighted to be in post. The best job in Police Scotland is the one I now occupy. My first period of time is absolutely about getting out and about across what is a vast divisional area, meeting the likes of yourselves, councillors across the area, meeting my own team across the area, and trying to listen and understand the issues and the fairly unique issues that the various areas have to tackle. So, you know, very much in listening mode, understanding the area, and then starting to look for opportunities to put leadership and continuous improvement in place. So that's probably enough of an introduction. It's nice to see everyone on this technology, and hopefully we'll meet one day in person. I mean, the whole visitor situation is obviously one of the first things that I come in this role. And COVID, I think, has undoubtedly exacerbated issues that maybe have been there for a while. And interesting, already picking up on some of your commentary around a new, you know, almost the new staycation people that maybe aren't used to operating in this area and share those concerns around road safety. I mean, there's no doubt that, you know, road safety across all our roads in Highland and Island is a key priority for us, policing wise. In terms of typically, you know, police are often at the forefront of a crisis like this. And thank you for the comments, the positive comments that you've shown towards Isla and the team there for what they were able to do in that kind of crisis moment. The Local Resilience Partnership did set up a subgroup to try and look at this in that response mode. So with the council's environmental health, with representatives from Police Scotland, and that very much dealt with the immediacy of the situation and some of the activities that have already been described and that you will have witnessed played out in that. I think the last Local Resilience Partnership very much were of a view that actually Resilience Partnership landscape is not the right place for the longer term discussions to play out. It's right in a sort of response side of life, but not really for longer term planning. And there was an action on Highland Council to either identify an existing forum or indeed create a new forum, and to get the right people at both a local and a national level around the table to try and think through some of the options going forward. So that's a live action that sits with the Chief Exec of Highland Council to progress. So I think that will be a useful, if it is an existing forum or a new one, will be represented on that from a policing point of view. There's always going to be a policing solution to this, but there are many other things that we can do, and some of them are already being spoken about by yourselves. In terms of the sort of the seasonal sort of approach, obviously in Skye at the moment, we do increase resources on a seasonal basis. I don't know if that was what you were alluding to in terms of us looking at our own resourcing in the area over the summer. Obviously, you know, being new to the division, I'm happy to have a look at any of these kind of options. I'm meeting with Isla on Wednesday, so probably be keen to hear her views on it. So happy to take that one on board and sort of think about that. We've obviously got a new area commander in place now, so a new divisional commander. We've got Isla's experiences, so we're happy to take that away and have a think about how our policing deployment generally across the division fits the demands it faces, and specifically in this area. Happy to do that and feedback at a future meeting in terms of any thoughts that we have. That's probably enough from me, I suspect, councillors, and thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief Superintendent. It's great to see you here, and thank you very much for joining. As we're talking about resourcing, can I take up that issue? And it's interesting the point that Councillor Thompson's made about sort of seasonal resourcing. I would make the plea that whilst recognising that you have a difficulty with resourcing and you couldn't say, and this is conversation that I've had with Isla Campbell, that Isla wouldn't be in a position to say we will be in Glen Nevis 2 weekends of the month with high profile policing. But there is, many of our communities feel that if there were, if you like, special policing events where Isla was able to call in some of the specialist units that are available within Police Scotland, for example, maybe a drug unit from elsewhere that could assist with high profile policing, stopping people coming out of Glen Etive on a Sunday morning that are likely to be over the drink drive limits, or are likely to be in possession of drugs, that a few high profile policing events like that in the hotspot areas around Lochaber will soon get the message out that there is zero tolerance, both by the local communities, by Highland Council and by the police, towards that sort of behaviour. Isla's predecessor, before he retired, when we had this problem in Glen Etive a few years ago, was able to call upon one of those specialist units, which I think was the drug unit from Inverness, for a high profile policing event like that. But it was a one-off. He wasn't able to replicate it. And I guess it's getting that message out into social media that you can't get away with that sort of behaviour in Lochaber. We need to go elsewhere. I know that's a selfish attitude, pushing the problem maybe elsewhere, but it's one that I certainly think would be effective, and many of our communities share that same sentiment.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I absolutely support what you're proposing. That's exactly what we should be seeing with Police Scotland, is we should have the best of local policing and the best of national support. So that's the whole point of Police Scotland, and we should be able to turn around those kind of operations you're describing as and when intelligence and resources allow. So again, happy to take that away into my discussions with Isla and see what's been done before and what we should do and when's a sensible time to do it as well, so that we get the maximum effect. So yeah, no, quite comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's much appreciated. Isla, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, it's just to give a few points that have been taken a note of. Positively, there's some movement in that we'll probably have some police officer accommodation available in Fort William, hopefully by the start of next year, which should help to an extent with our recruiting problem. But also, if the Chief Super is able to allow it, we'll potentially be able to bring some staff into the area on a temporary basis, say for a whole weekend, and accommodate them here so that we can do those sort of high profile operations you're talking about, but also potentially do something similar to what Skye have, where they have secondees in peak periods. So that's a really positive change that's just happened in the last week. And talking about the bids for resource, Dennis has actually done a great favour by
actually taking statistics every day out in Moor and Arisaig in relation to the peaks, in addition to the anecdotal information he had in his head already about when to, concentrate our resource, which is why we picked the weekend we did in August to be down there in a high profile way. That of course then brought on Glenetiv into my inbox, who were asking why they didn't resource. So I'll be joining the community council meeting there tonight, but I've already had a conversation with their chair that we're going to committing a Glencoe officer as a single point of contact for Glenetiv to move things forward there as part of the joint approach that's in train. And Ross McCartney, who's a local sergeant here, who's joined me, you can't see him on the screen, but he is there. He'll be overseeing that work as well. And I've picked up on the fact that a similar scenario will play out in Glenetiv. So I would look to give you a single point of contact for that as well, so that we've got all the points covered. And I've still been very kind of open in the fact that we cannot sustain every weekend, but I do get your point about the kind of high profile, let the word get out there that there is a chance of being caught out for various different things if you're being antisocial in these places, that the police are likely to catch you for it. And I totally agree from what my officers have said, is that there's definitely a different kind of visitor this year that we've not had to face before. I think Richard's report reflects the difficulties up in Lochaber, which is something we'll have to be wise to for next year. Bit of criminality in terms of dishonesties going on up there, and in Glenetiv, which are very difficult to deal with and detect, although I've got high hopes for the incidents that happened in Lochaber. I had a really good conversation with the Morrison's Community Champion, which is a new post that they've brought in. And they're really keen to get out in the community, and they've already picked up on the fact that they have large numbers of people who are headed for holiday homes or Airbnbs that are doing a massive shop in Morrison's, buying things like single-use barbecues, alcohol, all these sorts of things. They're quite happy to do things like labelling, which would feed into that whole thing about how we reach that target audience when they're in transit. So there's a wee bit of work to do there. They're reaching out across the communities, and I would suspect that it might be worth having that champion in on some of the meetings that the subgroups for each different area are having, so that they can help as much as possible. And I had an invite from the owner of Highland Cinema to be part of a pre-film video, asking people not to record the films, but unfortunately wasn't able to take them up in that. But I would be looking to explore things like that, and as was part of the group work in terms of possibly using the cinema as a way to get messages across to that transient population who are coming in, especially when it's a rainy day in Fort William and they decide to go to the pictures. Yeah, I think that's my list all done, but happy to take any questions of what I've just said.
Thank you. I appreciate that response from both of you, and welcome to Sergeant McCartney. I suppose you bring a whole new meaning to an undercover policeman being off screen, but there we are. Councillor Henderson.
Good morning, and thanks to everyone for all the work that they are actually doing. It's much appreciated, and certainly up in the area that we represent, 888 corridor there, and you've got police officers who have gone about it in a really sensible way and done a great piece of work against all the odds. We have to accept that. But no matter what all the agencies do and the partners get involved in, and the council have done their bit as well. The problem, I think, with most of the areas, Glenetiv including Glenevis, we're working in incredibly restricted areas there as far as the infrastructure goes. Now, we've seen Skye in the last few years. They've been able to work their way out of this to a degree. I know it still grows exponentially, but it's been by acquiring pieces of ground. And I just wonder, with this paper that Richard has taken together, highlighting all the issues, but we're not, we probably haven't moved to the next stage, is looking, and really, we know ourselves from the first meeting that we had of the 888 working group there, that we could have almost solved the problem at a stroke had we been able to acquire or been able to get a consent from landowner to give over some land to be able to take vehicles off the road and onto private land. And it's probably a question for Richard here. Within the council, is there a feeling or an actual movement towards trying to acquire some extra land to be able to get that necessary parking? Because this isn't a problem that's going to go away. People will pile into these areas regardless. They are desirable spots, and we're not going to be able to really stop people. We really want to be able to manage it, but I think we certainly could manage it better if we could find or identify the pieces of land. We have funding coming forward that we can tap into now, be it the Crown Estates money and certainly rural tourism infrastructure, which I think is much more amenable to this type of thing. We've actually seen it at Glenfinnan, and I would imagine by next year we will have greatly improved the actual problem there. It might attract more people still, but at least it's working towards improving it. And with our partners from Transport Scotland, who will put double yellow lines in there to make sure that people cannot go on the road and therefore allow for proper enforcement. So anyway, really what I'm saying is more not so much for the partners, it's really for ourselves as the council to take the work forward to acquisitions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. I'll come to Richard Porteous a little later to answer that question, if you allow me, because I'm conscious of the police time, and Councillor Rixon has been very patient for some time. I'll go to Councillor Rixon in case he has a particular point that he wishes to raise whilst Chief Superintendent Trickett is still with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And yes, Councillor Henderson, I'll return to your point. I agree with you completely. First of all, thank you, Isla, for informing me of the real situation why police couldn't always help in Mora because the chair of Lochaber committee had sidetracked them towards Glenetiv. I am very grateful to you for informing me as to what I suspected anyway, but that notwithstanding, at least we can smile about it. Yes, you're quite right. I have been doing a vehicle count all summer. I was hoping to end about a fortnight ago, but Councillor Henderson stuck my arm up my back and told me that I couldn't stop till after Glasgow Fair on Monday, but I will be stopping shortly. Unsurprisingly, the results of those surveys are that we get our worst problems when we have a holiday plus good weather. Now, that's not a very surprising conclusion. I would absolutely endorse what Councillor Thompson has said about our local police. They have been absolutely first class throughout the summer, and they've had a lot of really challenging situations to deal with. People rolling up, promptly breaking open the bottle of wine, saying they can't move the car or the van or whatever else it is, and they've dealt with that, I think, admirably. So I completely endorse what Councillor Thompson says about that. I also know that we can't be unreasonable. We can't expect the police to solve every problem that we have. Part of this is about infrastructure, and it's only fair to turn to the police when things are becoming really unmanageable. It is certainly the case that we've had 3 or 4 really difficult weekends this summer. So I hugely welcome what you were saying about having extra police accommodation. And I would look forward to working with you closely for next year, because these situations arise remarkably quickly. I find that some Friday evenings, the motorhomes and the camper vans just pour up here after closing time in the Central Belt. Basically, once people are off work, with 2 or 3 hours, they can be up here. And then situation gets very tricky very quickly. So I do think we have to think about what we could do at those sort of peak crisis periods, which will occur next year. But I welcome the chance to work closely with you. And I do thank those officers who've been responsible for helping out in what have been difficult and challenging situations. I'm not sure we will ever solve the problems completely, but it's only with your help that we can address some of the height of the summer. There's one other thing which I would like to draw up whilst the police are all here, which is about one of the items which Richard Porteous drew attention to, which is driver behaviour on single track roads. Now, it does strike me that a lot of what happens, which causes problems in the summertime, is not down to badness, but to ignorance. I think Councillor McLean made a similar point earlier on, that this isn't people necessarily wanting to do stupid things. It's just that they're not aware of what the conventions are in the Highlands. Now, the police have always been proactive about this in the past, because if you remember, there are still lots of signs up beside laybys which say, police notice, please allow overtaking. These bright blue notices are still widely seen throughout Highland. So you have addressed this in the past. I noticed that I think it was last year, there was a lady in Skye who I think was involved in a traffic accident where somebody had rented a motorhome and driven on the wrong side of the road, or a car and driven on the wrong side of the road. And she managed to get the rental companies to put a notice in these motorhomes, basically advising people of driving etiquette in the Highlands. I do wonder if with police help, we shouldn't be taking a more proactive role to all those people who are now renting motorhomes for use in the Highlands. I think the problem is going to get worse year on year. There is absolutely no doubt that COVID has had a sort of psychological effect on people. I think a lot of people are reluctant to go into hotels and B&Bs. They're dumping into the backs of their cars or small vans. Some of these vans now have been converted for use for overnight sleeping. I've also seen numbers of people who basically just shoving a sleeping bag in the back of the car. If it's a rented home, is there more we can do with your help as a police force to encourage those commercial organisations which rent out motorhomes, that they have a responsibility to make sure that anybody who has a motorhome knows what the rules of the road are in Highland, what the expectations are. We have lots of single track roads. I've had numerous situations where somebody is obviously having difficulty reversing along a single track road into the nearest parking place. And of course, a lot of people now park in these laybys and parking places. So just to air that as a general issue on which I would welcome your assistance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson. Before I ask for a police response on that, I'm going to go to Councillor McLean very quickly because I think he wanted to come back on something that Inspector Campbell said earlier on, perhaps. Councillor McLean.
Yeah, just a quick point. We potentially could the police work together with somebody like the school to produce a small clip for social media that raises all these concerns. So the single track roads, the you know, how to behave on a 60-mile-an-hour road with a blind corner and a concealed junction, you know, that type of thing. I mean, I'm sure we've got the skills within the school to produce something that could go out on social media. It would be a relatively cost-effective operation. It would be unique to Highland, and it could raise some of these issues and potentially put that out in the campaign. Just from what Isla's saying about using it, and also it could be shown in the cinema, where we'd have something very unique, quick, cheap, that would put the message out in the most deliverable fashion nowadays. And probably the reason why we've got so many people here is the internet.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. That's an excellent idea. And I suspect that with those number of councillors with children, we could possibly scare motorists into behaving properly if we used our combined children's efforts. Our police colleagues, did you want to respond to those last points made by Councillor Rickson and Councillor McLean?
If I could just jump in first, sorry, I think I was supposed to be on mute when I was off mute and vice versa, so apologies for the phone call coming in there. I mean, I think, you know, both excellent ideas. You know, education is one of the key elements with road safety, as we'll all be aware, you know. So, you know, welcome all of the ideas. They're all very sound ideas. My only temper to it slightly is it's not just the police's responsibility for road safety, as I know that you'll all be well aware, and we would be very keen to work with all the road safety partners to deliver this. And so you know, everything has been an excellent idea. I just don't want the burden of it to all fall onto the police's shoulders, because it's a partnership, and we need to make sure that these ideas are shared across the partnership, and then the right agency and sharing resources, etc., can all come together to do it. But there is, you know, Highland Road Safety Forums that we participate in, and you know, all of these excellent ideas can be fed into that, so that we can, and we've got time is the good thing. We're talking about it now for next summer, sort of thing. So we need to use the winter wisely in terms of developing some of this educational material for next year. My only slight temper is just it can't all land on the police's shoulders. It's a shared responsibility.
Thank you very much, and point well made. I guess because we have police representatives this morning, our discussion so far has been aimed at the police. But I was going to say, once we allow you to go, that actually, although our focus has been on the police this morning, it's much wider than that, and it's a whole range of measures that we need to take working together. It's just that it was a good opportunity, as you were able to join us this morning, that we could bend your ear and an appeal for more resources to assist Isla and all that she does. Councillor Thompson, is this a police issue? And then we could maybe let the Chief Superintendent go.
It is, and it's to come back on exactly the point, if that's okay. Thanks for allowing me back in, Chair. Conrad, I completely agree with your point there about traffic enforcement and it not solely being a issue. My concern is that in terms of traffic enforcement, which is probably the single biggest complaint, certainly that I get in my ward about the seasonal pressures, that the answer to it, or the enforcement, if you like, is falling between two stools. One, the police on one hand, with limited resource, and the council's traffic enforcement on the other hand, where we also have very limited resource, and we're trying to cover two things, different things. This summer, I was really delighted to see vehicles being lifted by the police for obstruction. I think it happens very seldom. It's, to my knowledge, it's extremely rare for that to happen. I was delighted it happened, and I was really glad that it happened in a very public way. The question I'd like to ask you is, if you could design a much better system of traffic enforcement, whether that's council resource or wherever that resource was, what would it look like? Would it look like a lot more decriminalised parking enforcement by the council? Would it look like something else? Be delighted to know if you have a solution in mind to how we properly resource this. Thank you.
That's a great question, Councillor. Thank you. I'd probably need to come back to you with a fully formed plan on that. I mean, I have to say, and I don't want to be flippant about this, but road safety is very important in N Division, but so is domestic abuse, so is child protection, so is cyber crime. The vulnerabilities that I'm picking up on my my discussions with members of the public, the council, the police in this area are extensive, and actually, at the moment, I would probably say that vulnerability is my priority as a divisional commander, and some of the real challenges that we've got around that. So do I think that parking enforcement measures itself against those priorities? I'm sorry to say I don't. And police resources do need to be directed at the highest levels of threat, risk and harm that we face. So that would always be my opening gambit, I'm afraid, in that kind of resource challenge. That said, we still have a local policing, community-focused approach to policing in general, and in this area in particular. And when the voice of community says, as you've just illustrated, that this is one of their top concerns, then we need to address that as best we can. In more general terms, I do think that parking should be decriminalised. That's not a political comment. That's my policing professional view, is that it should be decriminalised. It is in many areas of the country, and then it can be enforced through other agencies. And that allows the police to focus on some of those other priorities that I've spoken about. And there are very successful models elsewhere. When you start to talk about obstructive and dangerous parking, as you also alluded to, then that rightly sits with policing. So we're always going to be part of the solution. We're always part of the solution. But in terms of, and actually my worry about some of the discussions and some of the ideas that have come around in terms of lots of double yellow lines appearing everywhere, is that you create, whoever's going to do the enforcement, you then create a real enforcement resourcing challenge. And I don't think that enforcement is the actual way out of this problem, in a more strategic sense. I think some of the other ideas around infrastructure and the like is probably where we need to go. So I do think we need to be careful that we think that enforcement isn't the solution to this, but enforcement will obviously play its part, and police will play its part in that enforcement envelope. But my preference would be that our policing resources are on higher tariff threats, risks and harms, if that's appropriate.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. I realise that we've overrun with your time and that you have a busy diary, so I'm going to allow you to go. Can I first of all thank you for attending this morning? It was a delight to see you. We have, as I hope you've heard from your colleagues, a very, very good working relationship between councillors and the police service in Lochaber. We do all that we can to support you in your work. We know from our interaction with our communities how you are held in great respect within our communities. We will be honest with you where we think there are failings in resources in particular, as Ina very well knows, but we also appreciate your honesty, which you've demonstrated this morning in making it quite clear where you think your priorities should be as a police service as well. So we do appreciate that, and it is part of a very healthy relationship between councillors and your police officers. So I look forward to seeing you again in the future, but we're going to carry on the discussion with council officers now, but do feel free to slip away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Richard, if you are there, Richard Porteous, could you perhaps respond to Councillor Henderson's point? And before you do so, I would agree with him. Interestingly, in the case of Glen Etive, there is quite an important move at the moment where the landowners are looking at the areas where they can provide land to create off-road car parking spaces along the Glen and actually direct people who are entering the Glen to those particular places. And we had a similar conversation with the Glen Nevis steering group last week. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Henderson, about we need landowners on side here working with us and where appropriate to make available a space to get people off the road. But I'm sure Richard will comment on that and anything else that he particularly wants to bring to our attention, and then we'll bring the discussion to a close. Richard.
Good morning, everybody, Chairman, members. I've been listening with interest so far. Thanks. To respond on the B8008, the working group, a local, I believe there is to be a meeting arranged locally with the community and partners, which would be, we're looking forward to that, because I feel that such a group is really key to coordinating solutions in particular area. Obviously, we've mentioned a whole raft of different areas from Glen Nevis, Glen Etive, Mora, Locharkeig was mentioned even. So each area has particular problems and needs particular solutions where they can be found. And yes, parking, additional land for parking is often the solution. And picking up on what was said by Police Scotland there, enforcement we would hope would be the last resort. So if we can create extra capacity, then that will go a long way to helping the situation in many of these places. So whether it's a new car park or room on the verge to create parallel parking, and then that would be a great success. If we can then possibly even charge for that. I think it was highlighted somewhere else that in the Lake District, even where you've got just 2 parking spaces at a beauty spot, there'll be a parking meter there. And that sort of income can help to pay for additional other resources, which will help with enforcement, maybe such as rangers or wardens, or additional council traffic wardens who can then maybe double up as rangers or vice versa. But also educators and ambassadors. Having boots on the ground can make a big difference to the visitor experience and to the success of the management of the issues on that busy holiday weekend that we've been speaking about, and throughout the rest of the summer. Yeah, so groups, local community groups and steering groups for the particular glen or beauty spot that we're talking about, I think that's vital. And in most cases, obviously, there's the RTIF in Glenetiv, Glen Nevis. There's the Glen Nevis partnership. So we're off to a good start. There is a lot of work to be done this winter. It's been an interesting summer for us. We have a resource issue. Obviously, a lot of this is extra to what we were doing last summer. Okay, these have been around for a long time, these issues, but we've been the staycationing explosion has meant we've had to throw resources at it immediately, try and deal with it, improve it for next year. Next summer, hopefully we'll have some capital money to spend, so our officers will be splitting their time between sort of what we might consider regular work and this additional work. So it is putting pressure on resources all around. Recognising that, though, the council now has a visitor management group going, a cross-service focus group, to make sure that we have a coordinated strategy across the Highlands. Obviously, each glen or beauty spot has its own problems, but the way we go about that needs to be coordinated within budget, and need to manage expectations and get all the right messages out as well. Talking about messages, social media was mentioned, and I think that can help. The Cairngorm National Park has put a lot of videos out this summer about a lot of the key problems, such as irresponsible camping and parking and littering, etc., and fire lighting. And but of course, those issues don't just apply to the national park. It applies to the whole of Highlands, whole of Scotland. So these messages, we could be helping to circulate their messages. Perhaps we should be producing videos of our own. All these sorts of ideas are being discussed at the group. In fact, there's a report going to the next tourism committee from that group, which will be one to look out for. I think to manage expectations there, as Alan said, Councillor Henderson, we need action. Fair enough, writing a report to summarise where we're at, but what comes next? Well, that's the hard part. On a personal note, I really liked an article that was in the Walk Highland website. I could circulate it to anybody that wants it, which sort of compared Scotland to the Alps in France and their approach to visitors, including camper vans, but also the sort of person that wants to camp near the road, and provision of facilities and places to park overnight, because in recent years we've been trying to stop people parking overnight, sleeping overnight in council car parks, but actually, why don't we flip that on its head and allow them to park there? It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to detract from the campsites which are charging people to park. Perhaps we should be charging a nominal fee. Different users for different facilities. Yeah, so local issues, but also wider strategy. It's not just about facilities, though, it's about education as well. I hope that's a reasonable summary.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I think Councillor Henderson wants to come back.
I am so sorry, actually. We did see, thanks, Richard. We did see that Walk Highland article as well, which was particularly interesting. And I do agree about the car parks, about using them for that purpose as well. The trouble is, most of them are not in the places where the people actually want to be. They're not on the iconic spots. That's the problem. So that's why I was sort of quite pressing on the fact, that when you talk about the capital money, that maybe we should just be a wee bit more clever with it next year, start looking at things like that, because I think, it's almost a spend to save. It's an investment. It's going to be something that helps the whole of the Highlands. So I think it's something we really need to get on board. Nothing to do with that, but when we're talking about the signage, strangely enough, it's the sign that we all love in the Highlands, the one that shows people about how to overtake properly or to let cars past. I found out on Friday that's not a legal sign. You probably know that, Richard, but because the way that the licensing authority for signs actually was held, nationally. It's now come to Scotland, I believe, but they still haven't taken that one on board. And we have about 10 different informative signs that they haven't actually taken on board. But there is a chink of light that we as Roads Authority should be feeding in there to try and push the case for that. And this came from Marco Bardelli himself, that they would be more than willing to look at that particular type of sign. So it might be a useful one to keep knocking at that door. You will get refused at first, but he says keep going back on that one. But just as I haven't been given the assurance that acquisitions will be made of land to get the extra car parking, I'll keep pressing at that door as well, and I'm sure the chair will as well, and our colleagues in Lochaber. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Councillor Raman, Ian, are you wanting to come in? Ian, did you have a question? No, I'm not sure he can hear us. We'll go to Councillor Rixon then in the meantime.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I think Councillor Henderson has hit the nail on the head there. There's a situation which could arise that a landowner is reluctant to give up land, but we know that in order to solve a problem for the future, we have to provide more parking. I think the issue of acquisitions has to be looked at. And I'm saying that knowledge that Karen McDermott is also party to this Lochaber Area Committee this morning. I think we have to be anticipating for next summer that we do need to provide parking in some of our most pressed areas if we're going to solve the problem. There's no reason to think things will be better next summer than they have been this summer. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Councillor Rixon. I'm sure Richard and particularly Karen McDermott have taken note of that. I think you make a really important point that acquisitions do need to be considered, and that this is not an issue that's going to go away. We're here for the long term. I think that's the message that we've got to get across to everyone. Councillor Henderson.
Sorry, Andrew, to come back. I missed one point. Richard, we have had that initial first meeting of the 888 group, but we deliberately didn't take in agency or partners. Pauline came along to say what could actually be done as far as the road went, but we deliberately did it so there were no recriminations. This was a group sort of working forward, and we will then start inviting partners, provided we can find ways forward with the community. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I have one point for you, Richard. It's interesting you raised the issue of the Lake District and the small car parking spaces that will have a car parking meter. I'm delighted that you support such approach. I would point out gently that it's something that I've raised on numerous occasions now when we were discussing the various car parking problems and the fact that we're charging for car parking and many other areas aren't. Something that Councillor McLean has mentioned in the past as well. Can we just get on and do it? There's support out there in the communities for this sort of approach. It would, particularly the people that use it, particularly the hill walking and mountaineering community, they would not object to this sort of approach. If we can show that we're being proactive and that the revenue coming from these is being used to go back to improve the infrastructure in that area, we will get the support. It's 3 years since we first discussed this. Can we actually have an action plan to make it happen? And I see Councillor McLean has put his hand up. Councillor.
Hi. So it's obviously support Andrew's point on that, but proceeding with caution that the money would be used for improvements in the area where the money's gained. Getting this, I mean, the unfortunate problem is that COVID and stay vacations move a lot faster than the council ever will. So it's trying to get some sort of expedited way of delivering schemes. Now, I don't think we even need parking meters. We only need a Ringo sign to make these things work. And there is areas that the council own land that potentially could be car parking space that are out with the need for approaching private individuals or separate organisations that could be utilised right now So I think to be talking about forced purchases of property when we sit on a huge amount of property is a bit short-sighted. We should right now be looking at what we have as a council and best utilising it for the present situation. I mean, I've watched with interest what other councils have been doing. So the car park in Arica, where people access the cobbler, is still overflowing, even though there is now a charge. So the charge was quite unpalatable for a lot of people at the beginning when it was put in. There was a lot of press against the action, but I can assure you I travel past it a lot and the cars are still parking along the road. So it might not be the only option, but the outcome of their decision making is that they now have revenue to potentially solve the other cars that are parking along the road. Whereas what they had before was nothing. They had a full car park and cars still parking along the trunk road. They've also got a massive litter problem there, but they've now got revenue, and I do see teams in picking up the litter now. So as soon as you start to generate that revenue and deploy it within that area, you can start to make some real change for the locals in that area and indeed the people using the facilities. So I think, I mean, we've went through parking time and time again. It's just really frustrating that we always end up back in the same position. And I think we need to move faster than all the forces round about us and just actually do something.
And Councillor Thompson, I'm going to take you as the last contribution.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's probably unanimity amongst Lochaber councillors on this point of charging in beauty spots and other new car parks. And I'm glad Neil brought in those reflections about the places like Arica. But I would love to see us progress more quickly, because I see the funding of a ranger type parking enforcement role funded out of car parking as a big part of the solution. I think it would help the police with their resources. I think it would help for the management of our beauty spots. But we have been trying to press on as quickly as we can in Malig for the best part of 3 years, and we're still not there. We probably, fingers crossed, we'll get there for next summer. We've got the machines in half of the parking area, but it is a long, slow job. And that is despite there being things like community Facebook groups called, Problem Parking Malig. Many, many members of the community are in favour. I think probably the vast majority are in favour of what we want to do. However, there is a vocal minority who are not, and they are the ones that are holding up the progress. So we need to keep going. It will be a long, slow battle, I think. I agree with what Councillor McLean said. I'd love to see progress, because I think we could do something for next summer. But we're working in a way that tries to bring the entire community with us, and that means slow progress. Thank you.
Okay, I don't. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I don't expect a response to that, Richard, but I hope you and Karen have taken that on board. And I would say that there are areas where we can do this, where there isn't any local interest or local opposition. So, for example, I had a conversation last week with the owner of the Ben Nevis Inn as part of the Glen Nevis steering group. He is exceptionally supportive of the council putting car parking charging in at the car park outside his inn, which is a council car parking area. The Nevis Landscape Partnership would like to work with the council exactly on that, possibly taking up the opportunity, as Councillor Thompson has said, as using the revenue to some sort of ranger role, a wider ranger role within the Glen that could assist with the enforce it. So that there is willingness there. Let's get on with doing it where we know that there is not likely to be any opposition, so we don't have to worry for once in taking the community with us. That's our appeal. I think all 7 Lochaber councillors, as Councillor Thompson has said, are certainly in agreement on this issue. Councillor Thompson, I'll let you come back very quickly and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you expressed there we can bring the community with us, but when we publish a legal TRO, and I would like, interested to hear Richard's comments on this, we can have objections from across the UK. So we can have legal objections from across the UK. It's not just the local
Yeah, yeah.
community. We need to position it wider than that. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a fair point, Councillor Thompson. Richard, do you just want to very briefly deal with that last point about objections out with the area, slowing down the TRO process?
Well, yes, it's difficult to comment without a specific case, perhaps, but obviously everybody can make representations, but whether they're upheld or not, I suppose that's a different matter. Obviously, if it's some legal position or some valid representation, then it would hold up the process. Yeah, not quite sure. Hopefully that won't be the case. I think you're on mute, Andrew.
Thank you. I'll bring that. Thank you for that, Richard. We'll bring that discussion on that paper for the end. I think the important point to make is that these are local conversations that we're having. We've got various steering groups. I know Richard and his officers are involved with much of that work, and the important thing is that we need to be starting putting that into action now, as Councillor Henderson says. And I think in certain circumstances we're well advanced to do that. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is a return to schools update, and I think Don Essen is joining us for this.
Sorry, Andrew, are you happy for myself and Chief Inspector Valentine to leave you?
Sorry, yes, of course. Thank you for both of your attendance. It's very much appreciated.
Thanks.
Good morning, Chair and members. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, can see you.
So good morning. I'll give you a back to schools update. Please accept apologies from Derek Martin, who had to give apologies at very short notice. I was informed first thing this morning. Derek was going to give an oral report, and I'll give an update from my own notes. Members can ask me questions, and Derek and I will get back to you in due course with answers to any further queries. So first of all, contingency plans. Way back in June, schools were developing a range of contingency plans depending on different possible outcomes with lockdown and return to school. A series of risk assessments were developed, and in August, the First Minister gave an update on the return to schools. Since then, there's been an ongoing review of the risk assessment processes with very valuable support from Andy McTaggart and Ian Jackson regarding this. In the West area, we've had area operational meetings on a weekly basis, which includes education, catering, cleaning, estates, health, FM and such. And these have been invaluable for linking together locally operational matters and solving some of the issues locally. Just now, we've got a limited access to visitors to schools. However, allied health professionals, educational psychologists and some other EHP professionals are linking to schools, and they're getting access for high priority cases as part of the Highland practice model. Last week, from the 21st of September, High Life Highland started re-engagement with schools, and this is a very positive sign regarding areas such as PE, active schools and music, and they're linking with the head teachers and departments on that basis. The current risk assessments are currently being reviewed on an individual basis. School improvement plans and standards and quality reports have been delayed in order that schools can move forward with the recovery curriculum. Pupil equity funding plans are currently being developed by head teachers with a closing date of submission of the 2nd of October. And there the focus of the Pupil Equity Fund is looking at specifically at literacy, numeracy and health and well-being. Highland Council, along with the other authorities across the country, have been given additional staffing monies for teacher staffing, and this has been deployed to individual ASGs, and the ASGs are working together between the high school and the primary schools for allocation of this additional allocation of staffing. Members will know locally that we've had COVID-19 outbreak at Kinlochleven High School, and I'm very pleased to update you that Joe Hanaway and the staff at Kinlochleven High School have worked very closely with the multi-agencies to support the identification of the outbreak and work closely with Health Protection Team in order to move forward the action plan. This has followed the guidance which is continually being developed in order to support COVID-19 outbreaks in schools. And this has shown very effective multi-agency working. What happened at Kinlochleven High School in terms of the workings and in terms of what was put into place for the youngsters who were self-isolating, including looking at digital learning, has been reviewed and revised and shared with other head teachers, including the most recent outbreaks in Gairloch High School and at Dornoch Academy. And earlier this morning, members, I was in a meeting with Donna Manson and Nikki Grant and head teachers, where Joe Hanaway very succinctly shared the experiences that him and his staff had gone through over the last fortnight or so in order to share those experiences with other head teachers so we can all learn from this process. So I'd like to thank Joe and his team and all the multi-agency working around that. It's been very, very successful. In terms of staffing members, we've got the retirement of Norma Young after over 40 years in a variety of roles within Highland Council, including head teacher, quality improvement officer, area manager and area care and learning manager. So on behalf of the Highland Council and the West area in particular, I would like to thank Norma and wish her a long and happy retirement, and I'm sure that members would like to share that as well. Also, we're about to have the retirement of Martin Sullivan. Now, you all will know that Martin has been at Mallaig High School in a range of different roles for over 30 years, including a substantial period of that as head teacher of Mallaig High School, and most recently as Mallaig 3 to 18 head teacher. So again, on behalf of the Highland Council, we'd like to thank Martin Sullivan for all his work at Mallaig High School and the wider community, and most recently in the 3 to 18 head teacher, and wish him a long and happy retirement. I'd like to take this opportunity also to thank Rebecca Machin, who was head teacher at Kinlochleven High School and then Kinlochleven 3 to 18 High School. Thank her for all her help and support over the years as head teacher as she moves on to her new pathway. Also, members will know that Andrew Kent, currently acting head teacher at Argyll Primary School, will be returning to New Zealand. So we'd like to give this opportunity to thank Andrew for his help and support this session at Argyll Primary School. Members will be pleased to know that there's been a number of head teacher appointments in the Lochaber area over the last 6 weeks or so. Firstly, the appointment of Jeremy Noonham, who was appointed for Mallaig 3 to 18 head teacher, and Jeremy's start date is the 26th of October. Jeremy is currently working in quality improvement in Yorkshire and previously had a range of roles, including head teacher across a range of different schools, including 3 to 18 models. So I wish Jeremy all the best in his start. We also most recently had the appointment of Gemma Playfair, appointed for the Kinlochleven 3 to 18 head teacher post, and Gemma's start date is the 9th of November. We'd like to wish her all the best in her new role. Last week, on Thursday, we appointed Louise McLean as acting head teacher for Argyll Primary School until the summer holidays to take up post from Andrew Kent. So that's an update regarding that. And in terms of general staffing, as members will be aware, there are ongoing staffing challenges with COVID and related concerns and anxieties and associated increased staff absences. And these are all different levels within education. So that is an ongoing challenge. In terms of SQA and SQA results, A number of members will have attended briefings and training sessions over the last couple of weeks or so, specifically on insight and SQA results analysis. And there'll be further information in the committee report on 30th of September, the Education Committee report on the 30th of September, and further information will be following in due course regarding SQA results analysis. Members were also asking for an update regarding Outward Bound, and I've linked with the schools in the Lochaber area to give members an update on this. In Lochaber, we are very fortunate to be part of a national pilot on Outward Bound to support schools with the recovery curriculum. The recovery curriculum has a focus on literacy and numeracy and health and well-being, with a particular emphasis on outdoor learning and play. Banavie Primary School is one of those who are involved in the pilot, and Outward Bound are doing a variety of activities both within and out with the school grounds, including the following. They're doing team building, low-level dynamics, problem solving, curricular activities such as mapping and orienteering, technology, art, science, and they're also doing John Muir Award and RSPB activities. So a range of very positive activities there and very positive feedback already from staff and from the pupils. We've also got Outward Bound input at Lundivra Primary School, and members may have seen the press coverage on the BBC regarding that, where Katrina Kelly gave an interview and some of the Outward Bound deliverers, trainers were interviewed along with some of the children. They're working in across a number of classes in Lundivra Primary School, and they're doing such things as icebreaker games, team building activities, creating bird feeders, weather stations, bug hotels and shelter buildings. P1 to 4 are doing RSPP Wild Challenge, and the P5, 6 and 7 are doing the John Muir Award, and research on John Muir Award and history of John Muir for local conservation, which is very interesting.
Thank you kindly.
Pupils and staff are finding the input and support engaging, effective and very rewarding. That was the feedback that we got from Katrina Kelly regarding Lundivra Primary School. Also got feedback from Spean Bridge, and there the head teacher said that Outward Bound, they've got 2 Outward Bound members of staff working with Spean Bridge Primary School, and they're currently supporting P1s to 4s in outdoor learning focused on health and well-being, the RSPB Protecting Nature Award, and the P5 to 7 are working in outdoor learning focusing on health and well-being and the John Muir Award. So members can see that we've been very fortunate in Lochaber to get the opportunity to do the Outward Bound with these pilots, and because this is a national pilot, we've had substantial interest from other areas as well. And I think it's great that the West area and Lochaber in particular are leading this in outdoor learning, when we know about the benefits of outdoor learning and tourism in the wider community. And this is very much linking with a range of things which you were discussing earlier regarding tourism and the challenges around that. So members, that's an update, quick update on the return to schools, a wee bit regarding COVID, some updates regarding staffing and head teacher appointments and retirals, and lastly an update on Outward Bound. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Don, and thank you for stepping in at the last minute. Very much appreciated. I'm sure our colleagues will concur with you in thanking those members of staff who are retiring or moving on to pastures new, particularly Norma Young, after such a sterling service for the Highland region and the children that she's been involved with over those 40 years. Can I also highlight, as you have done, the work of Joe Hannaway at the Kinloch Leaving 3 to 18 campus? I have obviously a personal interest there as 2 children at the school, so I've seen very close hand at how Joe with the situation at the school with a number of senior phase students having to self-isolate as a result, and one or two of them I'm led to believe are being taken ill with the virus itself. So he has exemplified everything we expect from our head teachers and our senior teaching staff, and he has led from the front in Kinlochleven, I know, spending an enormous amount of time in contacting all of those families involved and explaining the situation late into the night, and that's very much appreciated. I think he's been the unsung hero in dealing with the outbreak that we've experienced in Kinlochleven, and his speedy action should certainly be noted. And I've already had that conversation with him in recent days to thank him on behalf of Lochaber councillors for all the work that he's put in, and his staff as well. So thank you for that. I have a question, and then I'm going to go across to Councillor Rickson. So Don, you've told us about head teacher recruitment within Lochaber area. Can you tell us if there are any particular areas where we are concerned about general teacher recruitment? Do we foresee circumstances in some of our, I'm particularly thinking of primary schools, where we will have maybe larger numbers of teachers moving on after the half-term break, which will leave vacancies that need filling midway through the school session, that we should be aware of or concerned about? Or do you believe that this is just the normal run of sort of teachers choosing to go elsewhere or take career breaks or whatever? That would be useful to know. And I'll let Councillor Rickson come in now to ask his particular questions, then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Chair. Don, thank you for your summary of the situation. I noticed you've been in correspondence with me this morning anyway, and I'll maybe continue that. If I could just make a couple of general comments on that score. You have talked about extra staffing being available, and of course we do have absences, teacher absences at the moment. And I would just say in general terms, could I encourage you to look, if necessary, at emergency options, in the sense that sometimes there is no accommodation available in remote locations where there is a teacher absence. And in that case, could I encourage you to maybe look at things like, can we get a mobile home across there in order to house a supply teacher in the short term? Because obviously at the end of the day, school closures are something none of us would be happy with. There is, however, one other specific thing I was going to ask you, which is to do with the Small Isles ferry arrangements. As you know, there was a special arrangement made earlier this summer, which would allow pupils from the Small Isles and Noida, well, Small Isles particularly, who are staying in the hostel in Malig, to return on a weekly basis as opposed to a fortnightly basis. Now, some time ago, the Small Isles parents approached me and Highland Council officers to see if that could be extended. The reason that they're so keen to see it extended is that at the moment, with the COVID restrictions, the hostel has to operate very tight rules. And as a result, some of the children perhaps benefit from being able to get home on a more frequent basis. Now, to date, I've heard nothing further about this, but if you could keep us informed as to the situation with the hostels and the ferries returning home to the Small Isles, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to take, if you don't mind, Don, I'm going to actually take Councillor Thompson as well, and we can bundle up all the questions to you in one go. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Don, for your summary there of the Return to School programme. It was really informative. A couple of my questions have been, or issues have been touched upon by Andrew and Dennis. The other topic I wanted to raise with you was the work that Outward Bound are doing within the schools. I should probably say I have some slight interest here in that my own children attend Banavie, so they are amongst some of the beneficiaries of it. It appears to be really popular, and it's good to hear there's good feedback from both pupils and staff. And thank you for the detail there and what's happening within the schools. Can I ask, do we know how long this program is likely to continue for, and what the funding mechanism for it is, and is it potentially at risk given the public campaign that, or is it potentially at risk because of the, I think, well-known circumstances around outdoor education facilities and their lack of COVID funding? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. I'll start with Andrew regarding staffing in general. Obviously, at this time, we are finding that staffing is, at all levels, is becoming challenging, especially class teaching, both in primary and in secondary, because of COVID, because we've got increased absences, we've got increased anxieties, and we've got, in some cases, staff shielding. So it's a combination of different factors. We've also had, in some areas, especially in Lochaber, we've had some staff leaving, and obviously we've got, for example, the acting head teacher at Argour is leaving to go back to New Zealand, and we've had 1 or 2 other members of staff in local primary schools leaving as well. So we are currently investigating cover arrangements for these, but as Councillor Baxter highlighted, these are challenges and are becoming increasing challenges as we head into the winter situation, and that's why we're already linking with the Highland Council digital team, and obviously linking with, first and foremost, workforce planning regarding staffing and cover, and we're trying to investigate as thoroughly as possible possible options regarding that, and we will continue to do so. But in terms of the small isles, we'll touch on it later with Councillor Erickson, but we are looking at all different possible opportunities, because in Highland we've got a number, well, in the small isles in particular, we've got challenges if we have future staff absences, but also in other areas whether it be over in Knoydart, where we're going up to areas like Scorrig, some of the single teacher schools in Skye. So we're already linking with the digital team in the knowledge that if we do have staff absences, we're wanting to be able to put into place some kind of blended learning and support for these youngsters via the digital mode. And the authority is already looking into that. So we'll get further updates regarding that. But we know that there is going to be increasing challenges. Already we're having difficulties getting people for cover, and we know that that includes PSA cover, and in the future we know that the cover arrangements may become even more challenging with further absences. Second, regarding emergency options, thank you, Councillor Erickson, for highlighting that. You'll know that Norma Young and myself for many, many years have been looking at trying to get additional accommodation in areas such as Rum because of the challenges, and I will be putting that towards to Nikki Grant as in her interim role, but also linking with workforce planning regarding that suggestion, because it is a real concern, for instance, in Rum in particular, where there isn't any local housing, and there are ongoing challenges regarding supply cover, but also accommodation for supply cover. Now, and also we had someone who I didn't mention, I think we should highlight just now, Mr. Eugene Norman, who was the supply management cover in the Small Isles for a number of years. And I'd like to thank officially Eugene for all his help and support. But with Eugene's retiral, we've got even more challenges, and we do have interviews this Thursday regarding a replacement for Mr. Norman, and that should help. But just now we know that currently in Rum, for instance, there is very little accommodation, and we know that that's the case in some of the other small isles as well. In Skye, we're already finding that accommodation is becoming tighter because holiday homes and holiday lets in some cases are being retained by the property owners for family members in case of further lockdowns and such, and not even coming up for rent just now. So it is a kind of ongoing issue and concern across the whole of Highlands just now about the accommodation, especially getting additional staff in for accommodation. In terms of the transport, thank you, Councillor Erickson, for highlighting that again. It was my understanding, like your own understanding, that the once a week return journey was continuing. I've had no information regarding that service being terminated, and I think with the current concerns of COVID, both locally and nationally, I'd be hoping that that service would be continuing. I will link with Martin Sullivan in the first instance and link with the transport providers to find out if that is actually the case, but that was my understanding as well. In terms of Councillor Thompson regarding outward bounds, in terms of funding, just now the funding is external funding. It's not Highland Council funding, and it's part of the pilot. As far as I'm aware, this funding is continuing, and it's continuing into next term, at least until Christmas time. But I'll have to link and find out regarding the specifics for that. But one of the positive benefits was that when head teachers were notified about this opportunity in June, a number of our head teachers in Lochaber took up the opportunity, and because of that, we are at the forefront of the Outward Bound pilot. And at present, there isn't any funding issues regarding that because it's being developed and supported nationally. In terms of COVID, there may be changes in the future regarding terms of risk assessments and such, but as we know, as part of the recovery curriculum, there's a big emphasis on outdoor learning and play within the risk assessments we're using. So just now, the Outward Bound are delivering in partnership with the schools and in partnership with the youngsters within the current guidelines regarding risk assessments. And we will continue to take advice and take cognizance of any changes to the risk assessments. So just now, things are very positive and going well. Things may change, especially if there's no local or national guidance changing regarding outdoor learning. Thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the reports, Don, and thanks for taking us up to date with everything there and highlighting the problem that we do have out in Rum. The one thing I would like to add to this report, there was the fact that we've continually mismanaged, and it's not your fault, you've come into this post much later, mismanaged the asset that we had out there, which was a house that would be able to take teachers whenever they were going back and forth, or if it was a permanent post as such. We've heard this highlighted about janitors' houses all over the place, but here actually was a building in our gift. And to be quite honest, the estate has actually ignored the problem all the way along until we've got, it's probably just a site now because even when the builders who were out building the affordable homes that are going on out in Rum there, they couldn't even manage to stay in the accommodation that was available there at the time. So I'd like to just put that on record because there's been an opportunity missed here as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure that is noted, Councillor Henderson. There be no other questions from what I can see. I thank Don for his input this morning. Always great to see you. I'm sure that photo that you have in the background was the only day it's ever been sunny in Ewig in the last decade, because it's never like that whenever I are there. But it's a lovely photo at that.
It's a pity you hadn't got 802 in it as well.
The island, though, Don, Stafford would be better next time if you can arrange that.
I can confirm, Councillor Baxter, that the sun is out and it's almost like that today in Ewig as well.
Yeah. It's a pity 802 wasn't lying at the pier.
Thank you very much, Don. It's good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we move on to item 6, Lochaber Area Roads Winter Maintenance Plan, as set out by Richard Porteous. I don't think there are any changes to the previous maintenance plan as indicated by Richard, but if councillors have any questions or issues that they wish to raise with him, Councillor McLean.
I'll just turn my video back on. So on the plan, it's quite hard to see on the drawing, but it looks like it's a similar issue to last time with Ballachulish, that the priority route actually runs along the straight side of the village that runs parallel to the 82 instead of up round the village itself, which would then include the the routes to school. But it's hard to see on that plan, to be honest, because it's so small. But it does look like a straight line to me, not a triangular line. Could you just have clarity that the top end of the village will be part of the priority plan?
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLean. We'll take Councillor Rickson next.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, Richard, can I just say, drawing attention to page 18, item 6, where it talks about community self-help, can I ask that we are quite proactive in getting word out to the local community councils about these schemes, and in particular, the network hierarchy for clearance, which is highlighted on page 26, where you're talking about primary, secondary and other routes. I just think it would help manage expectations and equally well help encourage communities who want to do self-help schemes to step in and approach you for the appropriate vests and so on. So if we could be proactive on that, I'd be very grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, same point that Dennis Rickson raised, but specifically about Glengarry. In years prior, though not the last couple of years, there was a local contractor who did some gritting, I think, using a 4x4. Are we looking again at having that kind of service? Because I think it stopped after a while. Thank you.
Okay, so Richard, a couple of issues for you to pick up there.
Thank you, Chairman, members. Yes, the first one about Ballachulish is just to confirm that Councillor McLean is correct. And yes, the map has not been amended, but he's quite correct in where the route goes. And just due to the tiny nature of that element of the map, we could perhaps do with expanding certain sections of the map, and then we would have to amend that so that it's clearer. So thanks for picking that up. And apologies for not tweaking it since last time. Yes, and I really like the idea as well of the proactively promoting the council, the community involvement. So I will be passing that on and perhaps improving what's on the website in terms of making it easier for people to find or encourage them to go there and look about route priorities, etc. And Glengarry, and likewise in planning for this winter, yes, we are looking at our options for contractor assistance. It's not something that we had to really utilise much last winter because it was relatively mild, but we have to prepare for any sort of winter, and that will be part of our preparations. Thank you.
Okay, I think everything was covered there. Councillor McLean's got the reassurance that that route is covered as agreed previously. Did you want to come back in on that, Neil?
It was just on the community engagement and contractor engagement. Yeah. I think we talked about at the last meeting that we were going to go back out and just make sure that we were covering all bases with that. You know, that there might be farms somewhere that has equipment that we could call on if we get a particularly harsh winter. I don't know if that exercise was done. I certainly didn't see any of that being done down in our area, but you know, just that, not so much that we're going to use it, but we know where it is if we need to.
Richard, can you respond to that, please?
Just to say thank you and confirm that that is something that we do, and we do hold a list of local contractors and their details, and it's a list that has got shorter over the last few years, but we are actively looking to increase that list.
That didn't okay, Richard. I think that didn't quite answer Councillor McLean's point, which was in many parts of Lochaber we've got farmers or landowners that will have equipment and plant that could be used. So they won't be contractors, but they will be people that we could call upon, particularly in the more remoter areas of both our wards, and whether they are reflected upon this list that you hold.
Sorry, I did mean to include those. When we use the word contractor internally, it just applies to anybody that we're paying externally to do work for us. So yeah.
That's fine. Thank you. Councillors, are we happy to note the winter maintenance plan for this year? Thank you. And then we move on to item 7, Area Road Structures Annual Report, which I think is fairly self-explanatory. I won't ask Richard to introduce this, but I do have a number of questions and points to make. First of all, it's one in terms of presentation, and I'm sure that you, off the top of your head, know the unnamed culvert B08630100C18, whereas unfortunately I don't. And even some of the ones like Glen Lidsdale, I would have an idea where that is, and it could be, but it could be one of a number. I don't know if there's an easy way to actually, and even some of them, we might not be clear what road they were on, whether we could have a road indication or, you know, the road between X and Y, that would help in future. I suppose my questions relate to what's missing from this report. The bridge stock condition chart at the bottom of section 10.1 is possibly the most alarming. It's not new. We've seen that the average condition index score is particularly high for Highland bridges and way over the critical point of 64. I would have actually liked to have known how many of those bridges that have a critical index score above 64 actually fall within Lochaber. I'm not sure that's suggested within the report. My recollection from previous years is that actually Lochaber has some of the highest proportion of bridges with critical index reports compared to elsewhere in the Highland area. I'm also somewhat disappointed that there's no update on the replacement Invercote Bridge. We haven't had any information as to how that particular project is proceeding and whether it is on course to for the capital programme work that is planned to take place and when it's going to start. And likewise, I'm somewhat surprised that within this report, there is no update on the Kinloch-Leven Viaduct, which I believe on a previous inspection indicated that there's somewhere in the region of £1 million worth of repairs that are required on that bridge. I'm even more surprised it doesn't feature in this report when several sections of concrete from underneath this concrete span bridge have actually come off this year, necessitating a relatively large area underneath, which includes footpath areas, having to be fenced off for the safety of the public. And since then, I certainly haven't seen any remedial repair work undertaken on that bridge. That will concern my community council here. It certainly concerns me as it's somewhere that I walk almost on a daily basis. So I think those are possibly, I had one other question, which sort of links back to visitor management, Richard, is that many of our roads and therefore our bridges are seeing a real hammering this year, not just from increased traffic, but increased traffic in terms of large motorhomes that are quite heavy, going over bridges that really aren't suited for them. So certainly along the upper end of Glen Nevis, that is the case. Many of the bridges along Glen Etive, I'm sure, in a similar position. And there will be numerous other examples around the Lochaber. What concerns do you have that that sort of traffic is doing a long-term damage to our bridges, that many of them will be in a critical state already?
Thanks, Chairman, members. To take the last point first, yeah, I mean, the additional traffic volumes is significant in some places, and that's one thing we often forget to take account of is our visitor traffic, because statistics often look at resident populations, but don't actually take into account the population of summer visitors that we have, which, you know, at this time of year often doubles the volume that's using the road. And as all vehicles become larger, domestic cars as well as camper vans, it has a cumulative effect. And one effect of COVID this year, obviously, was to put the council's budget into disarray. This was a year when we were hoping to receive an extra allocation for roads funding, and of course that, through nobody's fault, that wasn't forthcoming. But it does, you know, but it's great to highlight it as a thank you for that, because it's an issue that isn't going away, and it's actually just getting worse. The other issue about Invercoe Bridge, sorry, I did put there was a request for a briefing to come to members through some method, possibly a ward business meeting, but it ended up being an email before this committee. So I was just looking there, and it was sent, but it perhaps hasn't been redistributed to members. So that's maybe as much my fault as anybody. So I apologise for that, and I'll circulate that after the committee. Hope that's okay. And the other one was yeah, the criticals within Lochaber and the lack of an area perspective at the beginning of the report. So I picked up those points, and I think we can definitely refine this report to give a better local angle next time. And if there's any updates following this committee, then I'll certainly provide those. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Richard. You missed off a response to Kinlochleven Viaduct. If you're, and I realise that you might not be aware of the situation there, but if you can't answer today, can we have a report to Ward 21 councillors, please?
Will do. Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor McLean.
Just a brief point. It's on one of the points mentioned here. I don't want to try and hone in on specific bridges, but the footbridge in Ballachulish was getting some work done on it. It's on here as anti-slip material to be placed on it. But could I just maybe ask that if works are to be done, that they aren't just left? I ended up having to get in contact to get them to remove the closure on that bridge, because there didn't actually seem to be anything being done. It was just closed off with no obvious reasons why, which meant pedestrians, particularly for the school, had to then cross the very constrained humpback bridge. There's various repairs needing done on that bridge, so it would just be good if work was to be done, that it was all tackled at the same time to minimise the downtime. Some of these small footbridges that bypass constructed bits of infrastructure are very important for road safety for the kids. So that's more on the point. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. I'm sure Richard has noted that, and I know that the closure was moved quite quickly once officers were made aware of it. I don't think there's any other questions from what I can see. Nope.
Okay. Sorry, Chairman.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when you see the level of detail in the report, you know, and yeah, the amount of work involved in bridges alone, it's just another opportunity for me to highlight how I don't like to use the word under-resourced, you know, willy-nilly, but as a roads team, you know, we're definitely the Cinderella service, and the expectation is that we can provide a modern, what you would expect of a modern, any modern roads department. When you compare the roads department resources to other departments, whether it be planning or housing or, I don't know, education, obviously is not a fair comparison, but finance perhaps, we're dramatically under-resourced. So I always like to take that opportunity to get that point over, because it's always it can be difficult for an area team to keep on top of all aspects. We've covered quite a wide range today, and provide the level of detail and appropriate locally oriented report, and while still doing all the work involved in all the aspects. And yeah, it's sorry to go on about that, but it's a perennial problem for us.
Yeah. And I think all the councillors with you today recognise that, and hopefully those within the administration that are with us have heard the plea. And there's two that are elevated far beyond us mere mortals that will be making those decisions on budget. So I'm sure that they have been noted. In particular, Councillor Henderson, who wishes. I'm not sure whether she's to respond or actually has a question.
No, I absolutely know what Richard's saying. And the actual introduction of the bridge inspectors, all it does is we now know which bridges are in a bad position. But the point is that you have a chance of getting a bridge fixed once every 600 years if you do the maths. Simple as that. So there you go.
Yeah.
And we have Councillor Thompson coming in at the very last minute, who I'm sure has a budgetary solution as a key member of the administration's budget group. He's going to make a promise to you in no time whatsoever, Richard. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. No, I I picked up on your comment that I think the words you used were that two of us had the ability to make the decisions, and I couldn't let that slide by without reminding you that on Thursday, all of us present will be able to agree to the release of the best part of £2.25 million of extra road investment funds. So every Lochaber councillor will have a chance to do that on Thursday, and I'm sure you'll be one of those supporting that motion, Councillor Baxter. Thank you.
Indeed, I will. And I knew you couldn't resist such a barb, Councillor Thompson. But I will continue to remind you and Councillor Henderson that you are key members of the administration. Councillor Raman, your microphone keeps on flashing on and off in front of me, but I can't see you on the screen. Did you have something you wish to raise?
The only thing I would like to see would be in the winter time, if the roads were treated where the carers have to travel to see their patients and that. That's the only thing I would like to see done.
Thank you, Councillor Raman, and that's an important issue, and I know we've raised it with Richard in the past, and particularly thinking of those on the peninsula where you are, Councillor Raman, and we have made that point, particularly around the Harrickle area, that quite often the roads not gritted until after carers have to go and see their clients. So I'm sure Richard will take that up. He does have the ability, although I know it's a resourcing issue, to start gritting earlier than the 6 o'clock if winter conditions mean that it's important that he does so. And I'm sure he will bear that in mind, Richard.
Very good.
I can confirm. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Richard. I think that is you released from the area committee today. Thanks for your time. And that's everything within your remit. See you next time.
Thanks very much. See you next
Okay,
time.
moving on. Hopefully we've got Jonathan Henderson, our housing investment officer, with the Lochaber HRA capital programme. Again, Jonathan, I don't propose for an introduction, but if councillors have any particular questions or points that they wish to raise with you, we'll go to Councillor Allen first of all.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question in relation to the AIDS and adaptations budget for the coming year. And that's around how does the proposed budget compare to previous years and indeed the current year? And how adequate has that been in the past? In other words, what happens to tenants who prove to be in excess of the available money? Thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, are you able to answer that question from Councillor Allen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Allen. Yeah, the aids and adaptations budget within the current 5-year plan for Lochaber was set at £97,000. So the proposed budget or the budget which was agreed at Strategic Committee for Lochaber for 21-22 has been increased to £119,000 from that £97,000. So within the strategic paper of the 13th of August, it set out broadly that aids and adaptations was, or the allocation of aids and adaptations budget was going to be made on more of a needs basis than a stock basis. So it took account of an average of spend across the previous 5 years to set the individual area budgets. So I suppose that's a long way of saying that over the past couple of years, the Lochaber budget has been overspent on aids and adaptations, and the increase in resources now reflects that, and hopefully ties it in more with the number of aids and adaptations referrals that we actually receive. So despite the budget being probably light within the current programme, that wasn't or didn't mean that aids and adaptations weren't carried out. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of points. One is on the Jonathan, on the heating and energy efficiency. I have asked in the past about the sort of feedback we get in terms of reduced running cost for tenants, whether that's new heating systems or extra insulation, for example. And to the best of my knowledge, all the information we get back appears to be largely anecdotal. So we don't have, a great deal of evidence about them actually, the reduced cost. Now for heating replacements, I think we've probably got depending on the system going in, we've probably got a good, we probably have a good idea of what any cost savings might be before the systems are installed. But for things like insulation, it can quite often depend on the quality of the work done. So are we systematically trying to get better information about the tenant experience of, for example, the heating replacements that go in, other than just anecdotal? So are tenants willing to share with us the running costs, so we can actually measure more accurately the benefit that they gain from these new systems that are going in? Obviously, with heating, systems need to go in because the old ones are can be at the end of their lifespan and need replacing. But so for heating, and so to a lesser extent, things like to a greater extent, things like insulation, I think it's really important that we get good evidence of the success or otherwise. So how are we going about getting systematic information about that? The second point I wanted to make was just to you, Chair. You asked me a question in Council about the capital programme and its appearance at Area Committee. Here we have an example of the housing element of the capital programme. We have never seen a report on capital spend on other council assets, whether that's the Lochaber schools, other properties, depots, High Life Highland buildings, which the council owns. And I would hope within a couple of years we will start to see that kind of report coming to Area Committee, so that we can, and I hope, make influential decisions on those matters. But we can do it within housing, but the bulk of the council's assets we can't yet do. But we need to be there. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I think when I look at these reports, it highlights to me the complete lack of oversight of all the other major buildings that we have. Thank you.
Hello.
I thank you, Councillor Thompson, particularly for that last point, and I concur with you, and I hope that, as you say, we can see other areas of the council's capital spending reported in such a way as housing already provide. Jonathan, are you able to respond to Councillor Thompson's first point?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, it's in my view, and I'm picking up there that you would support this as well, the feedback and perhaps more the empirical feedback that we get from measures that we take is as important as anything else. And I mean, at the moment, probably our evidence does tend to be more anecdotal in nature, which I think is important because it does help to illustrate some of the more qualitative side of the works that we undertake. We do at present focus in on EPC scores as well, so looking at pre-EPC scores and then following on the works that we carry out, doing a post-EPC score to see what the improvement has been in the energy efficiency standard of a property, and also within the EPC, if you've seen one, it details the kind of carbon savings that you would expect to experience from the measures that had been taken. But I think looking at EPC scores alone doesn't provide you with the full picture, and it also, in my view, probably doesn't fit best with the number of different communities that we have that the capital programme is aiming to support. So a solution in Lochaber is not necessarily the same as a solution in Nairn, for instance. So with colleagues in the energy team on more recent contracts, what we've actually been doing is just as you've said, is having a selection of tenants or discussing with tenants, those who are prepared to share with us their bills pre the works that we carry out, and then have a kind of 3 to 6 month analysis of the measure once it's in place, just to support that the action that we've taken has provided the benefit that we would expect, and that then itself leads into future decisions that we may take in respect of what the offering actually is. So I hope that goes to show that we are working on that at the moment, but it's something that we're kind of quite passionate about.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I don't think there's any other points that members wish to raise with you this afternoon. Thank you for your time as ever. Thank you. And we'll move on to item 10, which is Cameron Square. Oh, sorry, Councillor McLean. No, can't hear you, Councillor McLean, if you have a point that you wanted to raise, and I think Jonathan's now gone.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yeah. So since the paper has been issued, we've been issued a report came through from Dot there on the Invercoe Bridge. If the Invercoe Bridge was in the papers, I would have had to declare an interest. So I want to state that now that I'm declaring an interest in the Invercoe Bridge project.
Thank you, Councillor McLean. That will be noted. Moving on to item 10, Cameron Square Canopy Project. This is a homologation of previous decision made back in July, which needs to be noted by committee and confirmed. Content with that?
Agreed.
We move on to an urgent item of business as previously circulated by the committee clerk on Friday at the request of Councillor Rickson. I've agreed to take this as an urgent item of business of the Lochaber Health and Social Care Redesign Steering Group because of the public interest of our constituents and the impact that it has on Lochaber. And I will invite Councillor Rickson to speak to this.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, thank you very much for agreeing to take this as an urgent item of business. It's come to my attention recently through the press and through numerous items of correspondence. The Lochaber Health and Social Care Redesign Steering Group, of course, probably most prominently is to do with the New Belford. But of course, it's a much wider issue than that. But the New Belford is a matter of prime concern for many people. It met on the 5th of March. To consider a summary report, which was dated on the 29th of February. It was supposed to have had a meeting further on in May. Obviously, COVID banjaxed a lot of that. And it was then scheduled to have a meeting on August the 20th. On the 12th of August, all members of the steering group were advised that the meeting had been cancelled. The words which were used by the officer cancelling it said as follows: "We're not yet in the position to restart the project due to our ongoing work remobilising services and designing new ways for services to operate within the COVID guidelines." Now, since then, there has been no public intimation of any rescheduled date. There's increasing concern from many people who are actually on that steering group, who are involved in the health service or have been in the past closely involved with the health service. I think that in light of that degree of public concern, I asked the Lochaber Area Committee councillors to agree to a letter to the Chief Executive NHS Highland, drawing attention to this public concern and asking that they treat the matter with urgency. The reason for that is that many organisations, ourselves included, have adapted to new ways of working in the course of COVID. We now meet quite happily on Teams or Zoom or teleconferencing. The NHS is a large organisation. I in no way underestimate the enormous stress that COVID places them all under, but I think it should still be possible to call meetings of this steering group and progress the matter, because nothing can happen until the steering group has concluded its thoughts and presented a case to the Scottish Government for further action. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ritson, and thank you for raising this issue. Although I'm not a member of that steering group, and I know you are representing councillor interests on it, I do get copies of the agenda and the minutes, and I would say that this is symptomatic of how NHS Highland have approached this situation over many years. Members of the steering group have complained about meetings cancelled at late notice, no real explanation given. So I would say that this is a part of a pattern from NHS Highland, and a convenient excuse at the moment is the current problems that we've had with working with the pandemic and subsequent lockdown. I'm sure all councillors would agree to a letter going from this committee to NHS Highland. I would also suggest, Councillor Rickson, if you're happy with this, that we also write to the relevant Cabinet Secretary for Health to make them aware in government that this is a continuing problem for us in Lochaber, if you're content with that as becoming part of the recommendation on this committee.
Indeed, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other councillors which wish to comment, or are we all content with that course of action?
Content.
Thank you.
Yes, content.
Fantastic, thank you. And we move on to item 11, which is noting our minutes of the Lochaber committee held on the 29th of June 2020, which have subsequently been approved by the council at the end of July. And that brings our business to an end. Councillors, before we leave, we have a ward business meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock. Would you rather just have a 15-minute break and continue with that, or would you rather convene at 2 o'clock? I'm content to have a 15 break and try and get through business with the ward business meeting and then get on with the rest of our day.
That makes sense to me if everyone else can do that.
Dot, have we got a link to join that ward business meeting separately?
Yep, if you just disconnect just now, I will resend an altered time slot for the ward business meeting for 1:15.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Alistair, for looking after us as always.
No problem, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
You'll be on a bonus, Alistair, twice with no starred items. Brilliant.